Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. Alright, let's talk about chaos. No, not the kind you feel when your inbox explodes with messages or when your kitchen catches fire because you left the stove on. I'm talking about the kind of chaos that corrupts reality itself, that whispers to your soul in the voice of your own desires, that reshapes entire galaxies with nothing more than an emotion given form. Chaos in Warhammer 40k isn't just the villain of the story. It is the story. It's the engine behind the nightmare, the great unseen hand that turns every hero's journey into a tragedy and every triumph into a slow descent into madness. When I first stumbled into the lore of Warhammer, I expected demons and monsters, your classic Saturday morning villainy, right? But chaos? Chaos is on another level. It's not evil in a simple cartoonish way. It's ancient, metaphysical, deeply intimate. It's the mirror that shows you the worst in yourself and then tells you it can make it beautiful. It doesn't need to conquer you by force. All it has to do is offer you what you already want. Just a little more of it, a little more power, a little more control, a little more pleasure. And suddenly, you're not fighting chaos, you're defending it. That's what makes it so terrifying. The Imperium can raise fleets, forge titans, create entire legions of enhanced post-human warriors. But it can't stop a single thought from blooming in a man's mind. Not when that thought comes from the warp. To understand chaos, you can't just look at it like some four-headed villain. You have to understand the warp, the place where chaos lives. You have to understand why it exists, how it feeds, and why it always returns. And most importantly, you have to understand the four. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. Each one is not just a god, but a philosophy, a piece of the human condition. They don't just want your soul, they want your agreement. They want you to believe, even for a second, that they're right. So yeah, this isn't just a story about monsters in the dark. It's a story about what happens when we stop being afraid of the dark and start listening to it. Most people, when they first hear the word chaos in Warhammer 40k, imagine demons, spikes, and a whole lot of screaming. And sure, they're not wrong, but that's only the surface. That's like judging the ocean by the foam on its waves. If you want to really understand chaos, you have to dive into the deep. And I mean deep, like where reality breaks apart and the line between thought and existence dissolves. Because chaos isn't just a group of evil gods. It's a fundamental part of the universe. It's not the opposite of order. It is order's shadow, the thing that forms when you try to impose will upon a sentient cosmos. See, in the Warhammer universe, there's this dimension called the warp. It's not a place you can map or chart in the usual sense. It's a roiling, ever-changing sea of pure psychic energy, a mirror world born from the collective consciousness of all sentient beings. Every hope, every fear, every act of love or hatred or ambition echoes into the warp and gives it shape. And chaos? Chaos is the warp given purpose. Or maybe the other way around. Some say the warp was always chaotic, and that chaos is just the name we give to the worst parts of ourselves, amplified and made flesh. Here's the thing that really gets under my skin. Chaos didn't invade the universe. It was born from it. That means we made it. The gods of chaos aren't some alien force imposed on us. They are the inevitable result of conscious life interacting with the warp. Their emotion, need, desperation, excess, all the feelings we can't quite control. And because the warp reflects those feelings, it becomes their echo chamber. So when war and bloodlust spread across the stars, something like Khorne wakes up. When fear and rot creep into the hearts of a million worlds, Nurgle grins behind his bloated mask. And when the galaxy starts asking, what if and why not? Tzeentch stretches his wings. That idea, that chaos is unavoidable, is probably the most horrifying part of all this. You can fight enemies, you can build walls and train armies and burn out heresies. But how do you kill a god that lives in your own thoughts? How do you resist something that doesn't attack you from without, but grows within? There's a theory among fans that even if the Imperium somehow managed to purge every cultist and seal every rift, chaos would still return. Because as long as humans, or orcs, or Tau, or Eldar, or anyone else feel, chaos will have a foothold. It's not just an antagonist, it's the price of sentience. The very things that make us who we are, our dreams, our fears, our passions, are the seeds of chaos. And yeah, that's bleak, but it's also kind of brilliant. because it means the Warhammer universe isn't divided into good guys and bad guys. It's a universe where even your own soul can betray you, where the act of caring too much, wanting too much, believing too much can open a door to something that doesn't just want your life, it wants to rewrite your existence. And yet, there's beauty in that. Twisted, terrifying beauty, but beauty nonetheless. The warp is chaos, but it's also potential. Magic, miracles, psychic power, it all comes from the same place. It's like nuclear fire, capable of destruction beyond imagining, but also the heart of a star. That's why so many psychers fall. It's not just corruption, it's temptation. The warp offers power at the cost of identity, and in a galaxy this cruel, that's a price more and more people are willing to pay. There's this old debate in the fandom, whether chaos corrupts people or whether it simply reveals who they really are. Like, did Horus fall because he was weak, or because the seeds were already there just waiting for the right moment to bloom? Personally, I think it's both. Chaos doesn't force you to fall. It offers you a choice. A terrible, beautiful choice. And once you make it, you're never the same. So no, chaos isn't just the big bad. It's not just evil for the sake of evil. It's a force of nature woven into the fabric of thought and feeling. It is us, magnified, distorted, set loose upon the stars. And once you understand that, you'll never look at a demon the same way again. What's wild to me is that the four dark gods, the so-called architects of damnation in the Warhammer universe, weren't always gods. They weren't born in some divine act of creation or summoned by ancient rituals. They emerged. Like storms on a psychic ocean, they formed gradually, drawn together by tides of emotion so vast they shook reality itself. They didn't arrive fully formed with names and domains and legions of demons. No, that came later. Their birth was messy, slow, and terrifying, because each of them was born from us. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh didn't just pop into existence like characters in a video game. Each one took shape over millennia as certain emotional patterns started to dominate the warp. Violence, hope, despair, excess. These weren't just fleeting moods, they were the baseline of entire civilizations, felt by billions at a time. The more beings across the galaxy experienced these emotions, the more those psychic echoes built up, coalescing into consciousness. And eventually, each became something more than just a reflection. They became aware, sentient, hungry. The thing that always gets me about their origins is how deeply tied they are to historical moments in the galaxy. Take Khorne, for instance. Most lore suggests he was the first to awaken because war and violence have always been constants in sentient existence. From the earliest tribal battles to the rise of empires, blood has always been spilled. And every scream, every rage-fueled killing, every desperate struggle to survive, it all fed Khorne's embryonic essence in the warp. He didn't need temples or worshippers back then, just war. That was enough. Eventually, he became more than just a reflection of battle. He was battle. The roar of fury, the taste of blood, the purity of rage without reason. Then there's Tzeentch, who fans often argue was the second to take form. As soon as species developed imagination, planning, ambition, bam, the seeds of Tzeentch were sown. Some lore even ties his emergence to the evolution of psychic species like the Eldar, who were naturally gifted in manipulating the warp. Every time someone schemed for power or altered fate through sheer force of will, it added to Tzeentch's growing presence. I love the idea that Tzeentch wasn't born from cruelty or even malice, but from possibility, from the sheer potential of change. It makes him feel less like a villain and more like a force of entropy, always twisting, always evolving. Nurgle, in contrast, formed from something far more grim, despair. Not sadness, not grief. Despair, that deep soul sickness that comes when all hope is gone. It's no coincidence that Nurgle really started to awaken during the Age of Strife, when the galaxy was plunged into darkness, isolation, and constant suffering. Imagine entire worlds cut off from each other, eaten alive by disease and madness, no emperor to pray to, no help coming, just decay. People began to accept the rot. They began to find comfort in it. That's when Nurgle bloomed in the warp like a cancerous flower. He became the god of giving up, of embracing death not as an end, but as an old friend. Now Slaanesh is a special case. Unlike the others, we actually know the moment of their birth. It's one of the most catastrophic events in the entire setting, the fall of the Eldar, and it still blows my mind every time I think about it. The Eldar had grown so powerful, so advanced, so utterly decadent, that they basically tore a hole in reality with the weight of their own indulgence. Every cruel pleasure, every act of self-obsession, every artistic or emotional excess, they didn't just echo in the warp. They screamed. And that scream became Slaanesh. The psychic shockwave of their birth annihilated most of the Eldar race and created the Eye of Terror, a permanent bleeding wound in real space. That's how powerful chaos can be. It can be born from culture, from habit, from unchecked desire. There's something poetic about the way each god represents a universal truth. War is inevitable. Change is constant. Despair is inescapable. Desire is limitless. That's why they took the shapes they did. Not because someone designed them that way, but because the warp shaped itself around those truths. And what's even more disturbing? They're still changing. Just because we now recognize them as the Four doesn't mean it ends there. There are whispers, both in the lore and among fans, about a fifth god, or forgotten ones. Entities that exist in the cracks between the four. Some say Malice is one. Others believe the Emperor himself is becoming a warp entity through the sheer weight of belief. It raises this question: are there only four gods because we only believe there are four? What if new emotional patterns, new cultural shifts, or new crises birthed something else? Or worse, what if they already have, and we just haven't noticed yet? The four weren't always what they are now. They grew, they learned, they adapted. They each started as raw psychic storms, shaped by the fears and obsessions of countless minds. And now they shape those minds in return. It's a cycle, one that can't be broken, only fed. And the scariest part is that we're still writing their story. Every war, every plague, every lie, every guilty pleasure, it all adds to them. In that sense, we didn't just create the Chaos Gods, we're still creating them, every second. If there's one Chaos God that makes my blood run cold, it's Khorne. Not because he's the most subtle or twisted, far from it. He's not the kind to play games or whisper in your ear. Khorne is loud, brutal, and terrifyingly straightforward, and that's what makes him so haunting. There's no pretense, no hidden layers, just rage, violence, and the endless roar of war. Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne. The first time I heard that chant, it felt almost absurd. Until I realized it's not a slogan. It's a prayer. And it's working. Khorne is the god of war, hatred, rage, and martial prowess. He was the first of the four to fully awaken, which makes sense when you think about it. Violence is one of the oldest, most primal expressions of sentient emotion. The moment one creature picked up a rock and smashed another over the head with it, Khorne stirred in the warp. But here's where it gets more interesting. Khorne isn't just about blind violence. He's about glory in battle, about proving yourself through conflict. His worshippers aren't just bloodthirsty killers. Many of them see themselves as warriors, purists of strength, crusaders of personal honor, if that honor is measured in corpses. There's a hierarchy in Khorne's domain, but it's a brutal meritocracy. The strong rise by defeating the stronger. Rank means nothing unless you can defend it with your own hands. His daemons, like the infamous bloodthirsters, embody this principle. They're not schemers or plotters, they're war-made flesh. And the Skull Throne? It's not a metaphor. It's a literal mountain of skulls rising from a river of blood, each one a trophy claimed in his name. There's something hypnotic about the raw imagery of it all. Khorne's realm doesn't hide what it is. It celebrates it. It's a place where weakness is devoured and strength is the only law. What I find really fascinating and kind of disturbing is the cult structure around Khorne. Unlike the followers of Tzeentch or Slaanesh, there's no real need for complex rituals or secretive sects. You don't need to say the right words or light the right candles. You just need to fight. Every act of violence, every moment of pure, unfiltered rage is an offering to Khorne. You could be a guardsman on a battlefield, hacking your enemies apart in desperation, and without knowing it, you're feeding the blood god. Some worship him consciously, of course. World eaters, for example, have turned slaughter into religion. But many feed him without ever meaning to. There's this idea among some fans that Khorne, ironically, is the most honest of the Chaos Gods. He doesn't manipulate or deceive. He offers power in its most primal form. Fight and win, and you'll grow stronger. No tricks, no lies, just blades, rage, and death. In a galaxy where betrayal is currency and nothing is what it seems, there's a twisted appeal in that. You always know where you stand with Khorne, right in front of his axe. That kind of brutal clarity can feel like a kind of truth. A monstrous, tragic truth, but a truth nonetheless. But don't mistake that for nobility. Khorne doesn't care why you fight, only that you fight. Hero or villain, soldier or butcher, it's all the same to him. Mercy, compassion, hesitation, these are sins in his eyes. Even magic, which he sees as cowardly and dishonorable, is scorned. That's why his followers often shun psychers and sorcery altogether. The blade is pure, the hand-to-hand kill is holy. There's almost something ritualistic about the way his champions go about their business. Every swing of an axe is a liturgy, every spilled drop of blood a verse. The internal contradictions of Khorne's worship are hard to ignore. On one hand, there's this code of strength and honor. Only the strong survive, and you prove your worth through combat. On the other, it slides so easily into mindless carnage. World Eaters, for example, once had discipline, hierarchy, and a warrior's pride. But after falling to Khorne, they became berserkers, little more than engines of death. They lost themselves in the very rage they thought they could control. And that's the trap. Khorne may promise strength, but in the end, he demands submission to rage itself. There are fan theories that even Khorne isn't fully in control of what he's become. That he started as a god of martial pride, of warrior code, but the endless tide of slaughter reshaped him into something darker. That the more blood his followers spill, the more mindless and chaotic he becomes. It's like staring into a fire and realizing it's not warming you anymore. It's consuming everything, including you. Still, some fans argue that there's something admirable in the raw intensity of Khorne's creed. No lies, no pretense, no cowardice, just strength earned in the crucible of combat. And I get it. In a universe full of tricksters and monsters wearing masks, there's something horrifyingly refreshing about a god who doesn't hide what he wants. Blood, always more blood. But at what cost? The deeper you fall into Khorne's orbit, the less you remember why you picked up the blade in the first place. You stop fighting for justice, or survival, or duty. You fight because it feels good, because it's the only thing left that feels real. And when the last enemy is dead, you turn on your allies, then on your brothers, then, finally, on yourself. That's Khorne's true curse. Not that he kills you, but that he makes you kill everything else first. Nurgle is one of those chaos gods that creeps up on you. Slow, patient, rotting at the edges of your mind until one day you wake up and realize he's been there all along. Unlike Khorne's screaming rage or Tzeentch's twisting schemes, Nurgle doesn't announce himself with fear, he seeps in. A cough that doesn't go away, a wound that refuses to heal, a sense of dread that curdles into acceptance. And then, strangely, peace. It's easy to look at Nurgle and feel disgust. He's the Lord of Decay, after all. Everything about him is bloated, diseased, putrid. His followers are covered in sores, their bodies swollen and deformed, their armor rusted and leaking filth. You'd think they'd be miserable, right? But here's the thing that really messes with your head. They're happy. Heck, like genuinely smiling through the pus happy. There's this eerie, joyful serenity in Nurgle's worship that makes it even more disturbing than the grotesque imagery. Because these aren't mindless zombies. These are people who found something they believe in, something that comforts them. And that's the trap. Nurgle doesn't seduce with pleasure or power. He comes to you in your lowest moment, when you're weak, sick, hopeless, when life has broken you down and you've got nothing left. That's when Nurgle whispers. But his whisper isn't a threat, it's a hug. A warm, sickly embrace that says, you don't have to fight anymore. Let go. Decay is natural. Death is not the end. There's something almost parental about it. That's why his followers call him Grandfather Nurgle. They see him not as a monster, but as a guardian, a provider, a comforter. It's unsettling how deeply his philosophy resonates. In a universe like Warhammer, where suffering is endless and hope is a cruel joke, the idea of surrendering to entropy starts to sound reasonable. Not because it's good, but because it's inevitable. Everything dies. Everything falls apart, so why not embrace it? Why not find joy in what others fear? That's the twisted heart of Nurgle's gospel. He doesn't deny death, he celebrates it. He turns rot into a gift, plague into a blessing, And in doing so, he redefines what victory even means. There are whole cults that see Nurgle's gifts as sacred. Diseases are called blessings. Tumors are seen as marks of favor. The more a body decays, the more it is loved by Nurgle. And the warp doesn't just reflect that belief, it magnifies it. So these worshippers really do become harder to kill. Their bodies might be falling apart, but they keep moving, keep fighting, filled with grotesque vitality. The Death Guard, one of the most infamous traitor legions, is the perfect example of this paradox. Once proud and noble, they embraced Nurgle during the Horus Heresy and became something else. Rotting tanks of flesh and metal that can march through fire, poison, and psychic storms without blinking. Some fans say that of all the Chaos Gods, Nurgle is the most terrifying because he makes sense. He doesn't need to trick you. He just waits. Because no matter how strong or clever or holy you are, eventually you will get tired. You will get sick. You will lose something that matters. And in that moment, when you're down on your knees, Nurgle won't gloat. He'll offer you his hand. I've heard this theory that Nurgle's laughter, the bubbling, choking, wet laughter that echoes through his garden, isn't mockery. It's joy. Pure, genuine joy. Because in his eyes, decay is not sad. It's part of life. The final, beautiful phase of existence. It's weirdly poetic, right? That a god of rot could find beauty in things falling apart. That he could look at a corpse and see a flower blooming. But don't let the smiles fool you. Nurgle is still a chaos god. His blessings are still curses. His love still kills. Whole planets have been wiped clean by his plagues. Civilizations have crumbled because one cultist thought, maybe it's not so bad. There's no bargaining with him, no cure. Once you accept Nurgle, there's no going back. And maybe that's the point. He doesn't offer redemption. He offers release, an end to struggle. And in a galaxy of endless war, maybe that's the most seductive thing of all. There's this haunting image that sticks with me. Nurgle sitting on his throne, swollen and smiling, surrounded by millions of tiny Nurglings that dance and play in the filth. They adore him. They're not afraid. They're laughing. And that laughter isn't evil. It's childlike. Innocent. In the most warped way imaginable. That's what really gets under your skin. Nurgle's realm isn't made of fire and brimstone. It's a garden. A garden of death, yes, but still a garden. Teeming with life that shouldn't exist, but does anyway. In the end, Nurgle doesn't demand you conquer the galaxy. He doesn't ask for blood or change or pleasure. He just wants you to stop running, to accept the rot, to find peace in the decay. And for some, that's the scariest offer of all. If the Chaos Gods were a poker table, Tzeentch wouldn't just be the guy with the best hand. He'd be the one who built the table, wrote the rules, and rigged the deck 5 years before the game even started. He's the god of change, of fate, of ambition, sorcery, and deception. And unlike Khorne's brutal honesty or Nurgle's twisted warmth, Tzeentch is a paradox in constant motion. Nothing about him stays still. Nothing is simple. Nothing is as it seems. He's the whisper behind every coup, the spark behind every revolution, the grin behind every lie. And the scariest part? Even when you know that, especially when you know that, you're still playing his game. There's a reason why so many fans call Tzeentch the most dangerous of the four. Not because he's the strongest in a direct fight. Khorne would tear his daemons apart in close combat, and Nurgle's resilience is in a whole different league. But because Tzeentch doesn't need to fight you, he just makes sure you never had a chance. He's manipulation made God. Entire empires collapse not with war, but with a whispered rumor. Entire heroes fall not to a sword, but to a single, poisoned idea planted years ago. It's all part of the plan. A plan within a plan. And even when you think you've outsmarted him, that moment of triumph, that's when he wanted you to feel victorious. That's when the real trap snaps shut. Tzeentch's realm in the warp is pure madness. Ever-changing, impossible geometry, colors that shouldn't exist, logic that folds in on itself. Towers rise, collapse, rebuild themselves upside down, and then turn into staircases that lead back into themselves. His great palace isn't really a place, it's an idea. A shifting concept made of thought and contradiction. Even his daemons follow this aesthetic. Lords of Change, his greater daemons, are ancient avian sorcerers who speak in riddles and know far more than they ever say. They can warp time, rewrite probability, and shatter reality with a gesture, but they'll probably trick you into doing it for them first. One of the things that really defines Tzeentch is his obsession with knowledge and power. Not power in the brute force sense, but in the metaphysical, reality-bending sense. He wants to know everything, to manipulate everything. And because the warp is shaped by thought and emotion, that kind of knowledge is dangerous beyond reason. That's where psykers come in. Psykers are basically human or Xenos conduits for warp energy, and Tzeentch loves them. Every time a psyker taps into the warp, Tzeentch is watching. Every spell, every vision, every flicker of psychic power is another thread in his web. Some psykers worship him outright, hoping for secrets and strength. Others resist, but still feel his pull. It's said that just learning too much about the warp can draw his gaze, and that's horrifying in itself, because it means that curiosity is dangerous. That wanting to understand the universe puts you on a path toward him, whether you know it or not. I've seen fan theories that Tzeentch doesn't even need temples or prayers, because every student, every philosopher, every scholar who wonders how the warp works is already serving him. Not out of malice, but out of intent. He feeds on intent like Khorne feeds on rage. But here's where things get really weird. Tzeentch isn't evil in the classic sense. He's not out to destroy everything. In fact, in some twisted way, he needs the galaxy to keep going. The more complex the game, the more moves there are to make. So he doesn't want the Imperium to fall, not completely. He wants it to struggle, to bend, to twist, to mutate. He wants the balance to teeter on the edge forever, because that's where his power thrives. Change for the sake of change. Hope turned against itself. That's what makes him so insidious. Hope. Tzeentch isn't just the god of manipulation. He's the god of ambition, of progress, of dreams. Every revolution that started with good intentions, he was there. Every noble who reached a little too far, every leader who said just one more sacrifice for the greater good, that's him. He doesn't make people evil. He just gives them the tools, the push, the reason, and then he watches them destroy themselves in the name of something they thought was right. There's this idea among some fans that Tzeentch's ultimate joke is that he doesn't know the endgame either, that even he, with all his knowledge, is trapped in his own web, that he's trying to change everything because he has to, because the moment things stop changing, he stops being. That's both poetic and terrifying. The god of fate, forever doomed to chase something he can never catch. And yeah, from a lore perspective, that makes Tzeentch absolutely mesmerizing. You can't pin him down. His blessings are usually curses, and his curses often lead to triumph. Worshippers who think they've mastered his secrets usually end up realizing they were part of the secret. His champions might start as revolutionaries or sorcerers, but they usually end as pawns, burned out, mutated, consumed by the very knowledge they sought. It's not that they failed, it's that their failure was the plan. In the end, what makes Tzeentch so terrifying isn't just what he does, it's what he represents. The idea that your thoughts aren't safe, that knowledge itself has a price, that every change you make, no matter how small, could echo forever, and that someone, somewhere, is counting on it. Every lie, every truth, every possibility. He's there, watching it unfold, smiling with a beak full of secrets. So yeah, maybe Khorne is louder, maybe Nurgle feels more personal, but Tzeentch? He's the god you don't even realize you're following, until it's far too late. Of all the Chaos gods, Slaanesh is the one that makes you stop and wonder how something so beautiful can be so utterly horrifying. There's something uniquely insidious about this god. Not because Slaanesh hides behind deception like Tzeentch, or overwhelms like Khorne, or infects like Nurgle. No, Slaanesh doesn't need to take anything by force. This god waits for you to ask. And you will. Because desire is a weakness that doesn't feel like one, at least not at first. Slaanesh was the last of the 4 major Chaos gods to be born, and unlike the others, we know exactly how and when it happened. The Eldar did it. Not intentionally, of course, but through their own brilliance, arrogance, and boundless hunger for sensation, they crafted their doom. It's one of the most tragic and terrifying stories in Warhammer. The Eldar were once the most advanced race in the galaxy. Their technology was indistinguishable from magic, their psychic abilities were unmatched, and their culture stretched across the stars. But they became hollow. Their mastery of reality left them with nothing to strive for. No struggle, no purpose, no war, no fear. So they turned inward, searching for meaning in art, sensation, and self-indulgence. At first, it was harmless. Pleasure cults, experimental music, wild parties. But the line between expression and excess blurred fast. And because the Eldar are so psychically sensitive, every indulgent thought they had echoed into the warp with devastating clarity. You can almost imagine the warp during that era, shuddering, bubbling, twisting in response to a million minds pushing deeper and deeper into experience for its own sake. Until finally, it broke. The psychic scream that followed the birth of Slaanesh didn't just destroy a world, it annihilated civilizations. Entire Eldar planets were wiped from existence in an instant. Their souls ripped from their bodies and devoured before they even realized what was happening. That's how powerful Slaanesh was at birth. A god so potent that reality itself was torn open. The Eye of Terror, a massive rift between real space and the warp, was formed from the shockwave. It's still there, still bleeding madness into the galaxy. And the Eldar? The survivors split into factions, each coping with the trauma differently. The craft worlds fled and became isolationist. The Drukhari embraced pain to hide from their fear. And the Harlequins, well, they dance with death every day. But all of them know one truth. Slaanesh is always hunting them. Their souls are his now. They just haven't been collected yet. What makes Slaanesh so terrifying isn't just the scale of destruction they caused, it's the nature of it. Slaanesh is the god of excess, perfection, beauty, pain, pleasure, obsession, and sensation. Everything that feels good, or powerful, or intoxicating, feeds them. And not just physical sensations either. Emotional highs, aesthetic euphoria, artistic breakthroughs, even spiritual transcendence. It's all part of the same hunger. Slaanesh doesn't care how you chase your passion, only that you keep going, always deeper, until you can't remember who you were before the hunger started. There's something deeply personal about this kind of corruption. You don't fall to Slaanesh because you're weak. You fall because you care too much. About your art, your appearance, your performance, your power. That obsession becomes your identity. And then, without realizing it, your soul starts to shimmer in the warp like a beacon. And Slaanesh notices. They always notice. That's why I think some fans call Slaanesh the most seductive and terrifying of the four. Because the descent doesn't feel like falling, it feels like flying. And the scary part? It's not always clear where the line is. How much is too much? When does ambition become obsession? When does perfection become compulsion? The champions of Slaanesh are often the most beautiful, most graceful, most deadly beings in the galaxy. The Emperor's Children, one of the original Space Marine legions, were renowned for their discipline and artistic finesse. They sought perfection in everything they did. Martial skill, voice, appearance, war. But Slaanesh twisted that desire into addiction. Now they mutilate themselves for beauty, scream their prayers through sonic weapons, and fight not for victory, but for ecstasy. They didn't fall. They were elevated. And then consumed. I've seen some fan theories suggesting that Slaanesh represents a kind of emotional entropy. The idea that every feeling, pushed far enough, becomes its own destruction. That even love taken to an extreme can become possession. Even inspiration, when overindulged, can become madness. That's the real horror of Slaanesh. Not just what they are, but what they represent. That we all carry the seed of our own destruction, hidden behind the things we cherish most. There's also this fascinating idea that Slaanesh, unlike the other chaos gods, is defined not by external conflict but by internal desire. While Khorne rages against others, Tzeentch plots, and Nurgle spreads, Slaanesh reflects. It's you looking into a mirror and seeing something you want, something that looks almost divine. And the closer you get, the less you recognize yourself. And yet, there's beauty in it. That's what makes it so confusing. Slaanesh's realm in the warp is said to be the most dazzling, the most perfect. Music so perfect it makes mortals weep, statues that drive you mad with their symmetry, daemons that are breathtakingly beautiful and grotesque at the same time. Everything there is turned up to 11, and for just a moment it feels like transcendence, until it doesn't. Until you realize the music never stops, the pleasure never ends, and the perfection you chased was never meant to be caught. That's Slaanesh, the hunger that feeds itself, the desire that grows every time it's satisfied, the god of never enough. And in a universe that has taken everything from everyone, maybe that's the most dangerous promise of all. That for just one moment, you could have it all. When most people hear the word chaos in the context of Warhammer 40k, their minds immediately go to daemons, heretics, and apocalyptic horror. And yeah, sure, those things are real and terrifying, but I think that view misses something fundamental about what chaos really is to the people who choose it. Because believe it or not everyone who serves chaos was tricked, corrupted, or possessed. A shocking number of them looked at the galaxy as it is, the brutal oppression of the Imperium, the cruelty of its dogma, the endless suffering, and said, no, I want something else. And for many, chaos was that something. That's where the whole philosophical side of chaos starts to shine through. It's not just a force of destruction. It's a rebellion, a revolution, a rejection of the status quo. And to understand why millions willingly turn to chaos, you have to understand how broken the galaxy is. The Imperium isn't some beacon of light. It's a fascist nightmare where thinking too hard can get you executed. Where innovation is heresy, difference is damnation, and hope is tightly controlled by priests and bureaucrats. In that kind of environment, chaos can start to look less like corruption and more like freedom. I remember the first time I really let that idea sink in. It was reading about the word-bearers, not just their fall, but how they believed in something, how they were searching for meaning, for divine truth, and how the Emperor's refusal to give them that truth shattered them. That's the thing. Chaos gives answers. They're terrifying answers, sure, but in a world as bleak as the one these people live in, terrifying truth can still feel better than comforting lies. The Chaos Gods offer power, transformation, purpose. They offer people the ability to fight back, to feel something real, to matter. And that's incredibly seductive. Imperial propaganda paints all chaos worshippers as frothing madmen or soul-devouring monsters. And to be fair, a lot of them do become that over time. But many start with noble intentions. A healer who turns to Nurgle to save his village from a plague. A revolutionary who calls on Tzeentch to overthrow a corrupt planetary governor. A warrior who prays to Khorne for strength to protect his family. A musician or artist who gives themselves to Slaanesh to chase beauty beyond mortal limits. These aren't monsters. They're people who've been pushed to the edge and found something that looked like salvation staring back at them. I've had debates with other fans about this for years. Some argue that chaos is inherently evil, no matter the motivation, that it twists and warps even the best intentions into horror. And they're not wrong. Chaos is dangerous. But I think it's too simplistic to say that everyone who turns to chaos deserves what they get, that they're just weak or greedy or evil. Sometimes chaos is the only option left. And that's the real tragedy. There's also this idea that chaos isn't just a religion, it's a lens through which people interpret the universe. For some, it's a genuine spiritual awakening, a connection to something greater than themselves. Especially for psychers who can literally feel the warp and interact with it, the gods of chaos don't feel abstract. They feel real, tangible, divine. When the ecclesiarchy tells you to pray to the Emperor, you're doing it out of fear or obligation. But when Slaanesh whispers to you through your dreams, or Tzeentch shows you visions of possible futures, or Nurgle cradles your broken body in his diseased arms and takes the pain away, that's presence. That's godhood you can touch. And maybe that's why the Imperium hates chaos so much. Not just because it's dangerous, but because it works. Because it gives people something the Imperium can't, personal connection. The Imperial Creed is all about submission, obedience, blind faith. Chaos, on the other hand, says be more, feel more, take what you deserve. It's liberation wrapped in horror, yes, but it's still liberation. One of the more fascinating theories I've come across is that chaos is a necessary part of the galactic ecosystem, that it exists to balance the oppressive stagnation of the Imperium. Think about it. If the galaxy were only filled with order, it would become sterile, lifeless. Progress would stop. Chaos, in its own twisted way, keeps the wheel turning. It's the wildfire that clears the deadwood, the cancer that forces evolution. That's not a comfortable idea, but in the context of Warhammer, it makes a disturbing amount of sense. And the more you look at the universe through that lens, the harder it becomes to say where evil truly lies. Is it in the daemons who devour planets? Or in the priests who burn innocents alive for asking the wrong question? Is it in the heretic who calls out to the warp, or in the planetary governor who lets billions starve because he's afraid of change? Chaos isn't clean. It's not good. But it's not always wrong. In the end, I think that's what makes chaos as a religion so powerful. It reflects who you are. It amplifies your desires, your flaws, your needs. It doesn't judge you, it uses you. But in using you, it shows you. And sometimes what you see is beautiful. Sometimes it's monstrous. Usually, it's both. So yeah, chaos is dangerous. It tears souls apart and leaves nothing behind but madness. But it also gives people hope, purpose, a voice in a galaxy that would rather they stay silent. And maybe that's why it keeps growing, because as long as people feel powerless, chaos will offer them something they can't get anywhere else. A choice. Talking about chaos in theory is one thing, but seeing it in action, that's when the true horror kicks in. All those dark philosophies, all the whispered promises and metaphysical ideas, they don't just stay in the warp, they bleed into reality. And when they do, the galaxy burns. Chaos doesn't just influence, it invades. Its power spills out in the form of demonic incursions, corrupted legions, heretical cults, and whole worlds twisted into mockeries of life. You can read all you want about the four gods and their domains, but nothing prepares you for the sight of a planet falling to chaos in real time. It's not a clean invasion, it's a slow rot, a spiritual unraveling. One day it's whispers in the dark, a rogue psyker having dreams they shouldn't. The next, it's a city collapsing into madness, demons clawing their way into reality, and the laws of physics folding in on themselves. Let's start with the traitor legions, the original Space Marine forces that turned against the Emperor during the Horus Heresy. These weren't just any warriors. They were the best of the best, demigods in power armor, raised to be the saviors of mankind. And when they fell to chaos, they didn't just betray the Imperium, they reshaped themselves. Now they serve the gods in their own twisted ways. The World Eaters live for bloodshed and slaughter, their minds drowned in endless rage. The Death Guard march through plague and rot, immune to pain, more corpse than soldier. The Thousand Sons wield impossible sorcery, their bodies reduced to dust and soul fire. The Emperor's children are walking symphonies of agony and pleasure, seeking perfection in every scream. These legions didn't just survive after the heresy, they thrived. They carved out entire regions of the galaxy as their own. Places like the Eye of Terror or the Maelstrom are more than just warp rifts. They're chaos realms, places where reality and nightmare bleed into each other. Time moves strangely there. Worlds mutate, and whole continents might be ruled by a demon prince who used to be a human philosopher. That's what chaos does. It takes the real and makes it unreal. It creates kingdoms of madness, empires that shouldn't exist, and fills them with things that should never be. But it's not just the big names. It's the cults, the countless billions of ordinary people who fall under chaos's sway across the galaxy. Some of them are desperate, refugees, slaves, outcasts. Others are devout, truly believing that the gods of the warp offer a better life. And honestly, when your world is a frozen death rock worked by hive slaves for some distant governor who doesn't even know your name, a little heresy starts to look like hope. These cults rise in secret, building temples in the sewers, whispering prayers into the dark. And then, when the signs are right, they erupt. Riots, sacrifices, warp portals. The entire city might vanish into the void overnight. One of the scariest things about chaos is how subtle its corruption can be. A governor trying to stabilize his failing economy might make a pact without realizing it. A psyker looking to understand their visions might attract a daemon familiar. A priest who starts to question the imperial creed might receive answers. These aren't evil people, they're people pushed into corners. And chaos is always waiting in those corners. Then there are the daemons themselves, entities of pure warp energy, manifestations of emotion given horrible form. They don't exist in our reality unless something breaks. A ritual, a rift, a massive psychic outburst. And when they do manifest, it's like watching a fever dream tear its way into existence. Bloodletters of Khorne, pink horrors of Tzeentch, plague bearers of Nurgle, daemonettes of Slaanesh, all of them as beautiful as they are horrifying, and all of them wrong in ways the human brain can barely process. Time flickers around them. Gravity forgets what it's doing. And the worst part, sometimes they talk. Not in words, but in emotion, in temptation, in memory. There are entire planets that have been completely lost to chaos, turning into daemon worlds where the rules of real space don't apply. These aren't just conquered territories, they're trophies, each one shaped by the god that claims it. A world ruled by Nurgle might be an endless swamp of rot and laughter, while one taken by Slaanesh could be a glistening nightmare of pleasure and pain. And those who live there aren't entirely alive anymore. The people on these planets might still have names, might still remember who they were, but they're changed. Touched. Not just in body, but in soul. And then there are the Black Crusades. When the champions of chaos decide it's time to bring war to the Imperium directly, to spread their madness beyond the Eye of Terror. The most infamous of these, led by Abdon the Despoiler, have brought entire sectors to ruin. These aren't just random invasions, they're rituals in motion. Every battle is a sacrifice. Every death feeds the warp. When chaos goes to war, it's not about strategy, it's about feeding the gods, about proving devotion, about tearing reality wide open so that daemons can pour through like blood through a wound. But what really strikes me, again and again, is that this isn't some alien force invading our reality. It's the shadow of our reality. Every cultist, every daemon, every twisted hero, they came from somewhere. They were someone. That's the scariest part. Chaos doesn't just arrive, it emerges, it grows out of fear, pain, anger, hope. The more the galaxy suffers, the stronger chaos becomes. So when you see it in action, when you watch a loyal Imperial world descend into chanting madness, or see a Space Marine Legion once sworn to protect humanity now laughing as they burn cities to the ground, you're not just witnessing destruction, you're witnessing faith in motion. Chaos isn't just real, it's alive. And it wants everything. There's this moment that happens to almost everyone who dives deep enough into Warhammer lore. You're reading about some horrific chaos invasion, or watching a planet fall apart under the weight of corruption, and you go, yeah, that's awful. But then you flip the page, read about the Imperium's response, how they flatten the entire planet, sterilize the population, erase the history, and suddenly you're not so sure who the monster really is. That's the thing about Warhammer. It's not a battle between good and evil. It's a battle between nightmare and, well, another nightmare in a different uniform. Chaos versus the Imperium isn't just about gods and armies. It's a war of ideas, a war of how the galaxy should be run. And honestly, that's where it gets really uncomfortable. Because for all of Chaos's horror, its demons, its madness, its mutation, there's something about it that feels free. And for all of the Imperium's grandeur, its cathedrals, its warriors, its devotion, it feels like a prison. A glorious golden prison with skulls on every door. The Imperium of Man is built on control. Every aspect of life is regulated, watched, and judged. From the moment you're born, your fate is sealed, assigned a number, a role, a purpose. Questioning the system is heresy. Innovation is heresy. Even curiosity is dangerous. It's a place where knowledge is feared, where machines are prayed to rather than understood, and where people are executed in the billions just to maintain order. It's not just dystopian, it's deliberately dystopian, engineered to crush individuality for the sake of survival. And yeah, I get it. The galaxy is terrifying. But does that justify turning humanity into a soulless cogwheel? That's where chaos presents a different picture. It's not organized, it's not safe, but it offers something the Imperium doesn't: choice. Want to pursue knowledge beyond the veil? Tzeentch will give you the keys. Want to be stronger, fiercer, more alive? Khorne has his hand out. Want to feel pleasure, beauty, or transcendence? Slaanesh will make you a star. Want to escape pain, fear, and despair? Nurgle will give you peace. Each god reflects something deeply human, something the Imperium tries to erase. Of course, the catch is that chaos doesn't give anything for free. The more you take, the more you owe. The price is steep, often irreversible. But for some people, that deal is still better than eternal servitude under the Emperor's boot. That's why some fans argue that chaos is the lesser evil. Not because it's good, no one sane would say that, but because at least it acknowledges your humanity. At least it gives you agency, even if it destroys you in the process. There's this recurring theme in fan discussions: freedom versus order. Chaos is the embodiment of total freedom, of unrestricted will. The Imperium is absolute order, where deviation means death. And somewhere in that spectrum, you start asking yourself, which is worse? A system that chains you from birth for the greater good, or a system that consumes you entirely, but lets you choose how? It's the kind of question that doesn't have a clean answer, and that's exactly why it sticks with you. I've read a lot of fan theories that suggest the Emperor himself feared chaos not just because of what it was, but because of what it offered. He didn't want humanity to be destroyed, but he also didn't trust it to make the right choices. So he built the Imperium to crush those choices before they could even form. In that sense, some see the Emperor as a tyrant trying to protect us from ourselves. Others see him as a hypocrite, someone who used chaos-adjacent powers to win his wars, then turned around and demonized the same forces he once relied on. And then there's the Inquisition, the hammer of the Imperium. Their job is to root out corruption, to stamp out heresy wherever it's found. But when you really look at what they do, mass purges, exterminatus, psychic lobotomies, you start to see that they're not fighting chaos because it's evil. They're fighting it because it's dangerous to the system. Because chaos undermines control. It makes people question, and questioning is a threat the Imperium can't tolerate. That's what really gets me. In the end, chaos and the Imperium are two sides of the same coin. Both are extremes, both dehumanize in their own way. But at least chaos is honest about it. Chaos doesn't pretend to be noble. It doesn't hide behind slogans like, "for the greater good," or "for the glory of the Emperor." It says straight up, this is power, this is freedom. Take it if you dare. And that raw, unfiltered approach, yeah, it's horrifying, but it's also seductive in a way that order never is. Of course, none of this is to say that chaos should be admired. It destroys worlds, it feeds on suffering, it turns hope into ash. But it also reflects something very real about the human condition, that we crave meaning, choice, purpose, that will chase those things even into the abyss. And sometimes, when faced with the soulless machinery of the Imperium, the abyss feels more human. So maybe that's the true horror of Warhammer. Not that there are monsters in the dark, but that the real monsters are the systems we build to protect ourselves. And sometimes in that moment of quiet rebellion, a whisper from the warp starts to sound less like a threat and more like a promise. You know, the more I think about chaos, the more I realize that it's not really about gods or daemons or apocalyptic wars. It's about the uncomfortable questions we're too afraid to ask. Like, what is morality in a world where survival demands cruelty? What is identity in a galaxy that erases your name and turns you into a number? What is freedom when every system, every creed, every empire is built to break you down and rebuild you into something useful? Chaos doesn't give answers. Not really. But it asks the questions, loudly, violently, in blood and fire and madness. It doesn't care about the rules. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't apologize. And in a strange, terrible way, that honesty has power. Because the universe of Warhammer 40k is full of masks, ceremonial, imperial, ideological, and chaos is the thing that rips the mask off and shows the screaming, broken thing underneath. And yet, there's beauty there. Tragic beauty, but beauty all the same. In the strange shapes of daemons, in the burning loyalty of traitor legions, in the whispered prayers of cultists who believe, not because they were forced, but because they chose. There's something compelling in that, something painfully human, something we can't look away from. That's why people keep writing about chaos, why fans argue about it, why some root for it, even knowing what it brings. Because chaos speaks to something deep in us, the part that doesn't want to obey, doesn't want to be controlled, doesn't want to be small. It offers us the stars, the fire, the glory, and sure, it also offers death and damnation and 1,000 flavors of torment. But for a brief moment, you shine. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, maybe that moment is enough. So next time you hear someone say, chaos is evil, stop and think. Maybe it is. Maybe it's the most evil thing in the galaxy. But maybe, just maybe, it's not a monster at all. Maybe it's just us, only louder, only freer, only unafraid. And maybe that's why it wins. Chaos is often described as the enemy of mankind, the ultimate evil lurking just beyond the veil of reality. But after spending so much time immersed in its lore, digging through the layers of horror, philosophy, tragedy, and temptation, it doesn't feel so simple anymore. Chaos isn't just some alien force pressing in from the outside. It's not a monster we can stab and be done with. It's a mirror. A dark, cracked mirror that shows us not what we should be, but what we are, in all our raw, unfiltered humanity. That's the thing. Chaos didn't crash into the galaxy like a comet. It wasn't summoned by accident. We made it. We continue to make it, with every fear, every scream, every broken promise, and every desperate prayer. The warp isn't some foreign dimension filled with unknowable gods. It's the psychic runoff of sentient thought, a spiritual echo chamber where our strongest emotions become gods and our collective trauma shapes reality. That's why chaos can't be truly destroyed, because it is us. As long as we feel, as long as we want, as long as we struggle, the seeds of chaos will grow. And maybe that's why it hits so hard. Because it doesn't just show us the monsters in the dark, it shows us the monsters that live behind our eyes. Khorne is the fury we bury, the violent urge we pretend isn't there. Nurgle is the part of us that gives up, that accepts death with a smile because it's easier than fighting. Tzeentch is our ambition, our hunger to shape the world, even when it breaks us. And Slaanesh is our longing. For beauty, for sensation, for something more, whatever the cost. Each god is terrifying not because they're inhuman, but because they're too human. Just turned up to 11, given form and purpose in a realm where thoughts have mass. There's a line that stuck with me the first time I read it. The path to damnation is paved with noble intentions. And nowhere does that feel more true than with chaos. Most of its followers didn't start out as villains. They weren't scheming to destroy the galaxy. They just wanted something. To be safe, to be seen, to be free. And chaos gave them that, or at least pretended to. That's the true danger, not the destruction chaos brings, but the hope it offers. A twisted, poisoned hope that pulls you in with promises and keeps you there with power. Some fans argue that chaos is just the inevitable outcome of a universe like Warhammer's. A place so brutal, so suffocating that people have to break eventually. And when they do, chaos is the only thing that listens. The Imperium tells you to suffer in silence. Chaos says scream and it will echo back. And that's a powerful thing. It makes chaos feel less like an invader and more like the consequence of fear, of control, of ignoring the human soul for 10,000 years. And if we're honest, maybe that's why we keep coming back to these stories. Why chaos isn't just the villain in the background, but the heartbeat of the setting. It's relatable in a way that most villains aren't. You might not worship demons or flay your enemies alive, but who hasn't felt rage? Who hasn't wanted to give up, to lash out, to escape? Who hasn't dreamed of being more than what they are? Chaos takes those feelings and says we can make you more. And then it does. But not in the way you hoped. That's what makes chaos so tragic. It's not mindless destruction, it's desire that went too far. It's what happens when we chase strength without restraint, beauty without boundary, knowledge without wisdom, peace without balance. It's the echo of every what if we never dared say out loud. And that echo, amplified by the warp, becomes reality. Becomes God. So no, chaos can't be defeated in the traditional sense. You can kill its champions, seal its rifts, even destroy entire worlds swallowed by it, but you can't end it. Not unless you end pain, end fear, end longing. And in a universe like Warhammer, that's never going to happen. The galaxy is too cruel, the hope too fragile, and chaos too patient. But maybe that's the point. Maybe chaos isn't there to be beaten. Maybe it's there to be understood. To be feared, yes, but also recognized. Because sometimes when we look into the face of the warp, we don't see monsters. We see ourselves twisted, broken, beautiful, and free. And maybe that's what really scares us. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to me rant about one of the most fascinating and terrifying forces in all of fiction. Chaos is more than just the villain of the story. It is the story, in so many ways. A reflection of us, a warning, a temptation. Something we can never fully escape, and maybe, deep down, don't really want to. If this dive into the dark heart of the warp gave you something to think about, or made you question what you thought you knew about chaos, consider subscribing. We've only scratched the surface, and trust me, there's so much more lurking just beneath it. The warp is always listening,